Next morning, the managers received a card of thanks from the ghost. Dear Mr. Manager. Thanks. Charming evening. Daaé exquisite. Choruses want waking up. Carlotta a splendid commonplace instrument. Will write you soon for the 240,000 francs, or 233,424 francs. 70c, to be correct. De Bien and Poligny have sent me the 6,575 francs. 30c. Representing the first 10 days of my allowance for the current year. Their privileges finished on the evening of the 10th inst. Kind regards. O.G. On the other hand, there was a letter from De Bien and Poligny. Gentlemen, we are much obliged for your kind thought of us, but you will easily understand that the prospect of again hearing Faust, pleasant though it is to ex-managers of the opera, cannot make us forget that we have no right to occupy box 5 on the grand tier, which is the exclusive property of him of whom we spoke to you when we went through the memorandum book with you for the last time. See clause 98, final paragraph. Except, gentlemen, etc. Oh, those fellows are beginning to annoy me, shouted Firmin Richard, snatching up the letter. And that evening box 5 was sold. The next morning, Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin, on reaching their office, found an inspector's report relating to an incident that had happened, the night before, in box 5. I give the essential part of the report. I was obliged to call in a municipal guard twice, this evening, to clear box 5 on the grand tier, once at the beginning and once in the middle of the second act. The occupants, who arrived as the curtain rose on the second act, created a regular scandal by their laughter and their ridiculous observations. There were cries of, "Hush!" all around them, and the whole house was beginning to protest, when the box-keeper came to fetch me. I entered the box and said what I thought necessary. The people did not seem to me to be in their right mind, and they made stupid remarks. I said that, if the noise was repeated, I should be compelled to clear the box. The moment I left, I heard the laughing again, with fresh protests from the house. I returned with a municipal guard, who turned them out. They protested, still laughing, saying they would not go unless they had their money back. At last, they became quiet and I allowed them to enter the box again. The laughter at once recommenced, and, this time, I had them turned out definitely. Send for the inspector, said Richard to his secretary, who had already read the report and marked it with blue pencil. Monsieur Remy, the secretary, had foreseen the order and called the inspector at once. Tell us what happened, said Richard bluntly. The inspector began to splutter and referred to the report. Well, but what were those people laughing at? Asked Moncharmin. They must have been dining, sir, and seemed more inclined to lark about than to listen to good music. The moment they entered the box, they came out again and called the box-keeper, who asked them what they wanted. They said, "Look in the box. There's no one there, is there?" "No," said the woman. "Well," said they, "when we went in, we heard a voice saying that the box was taken." Monsieur Moncharmin could not help smiling as he looked at Monsieur Richard, but Richard did not smile. He himself had done too much in that way in his time not to recognize, in the inspector's story, all the marks of one of those practical jokes which begin by amusing and end by enraging the victims. The inspector, to curry favor with Monsieur Moncharmin, who was smiling, thought it best to give a smile too. A most unfortunate smile. Richard glared at his subordinate, who thenceforth made it his business to display a face of utter consternation. However, when the people arrived, roared Richard, there was no one in the box, was there? Not a soul, sir, not a soul. Nor in the box on the right, nor in the box on the left, not a soul, sir, I swear. The box-keeper told it me often enough, which proves that it was all a joke. Oh, you agree, do you? Said Richard. You agree? It's a joke. And you think it funny, no doubt? I think it in very bad taste, sir. And what did the box-keeper say? Oh, she just said that it was the opera ghost. That's all she said. And the inspector grinned. But he soon found that he had made a mistake in grinning, for the words had no sooner left his mouth than Monsieur Richard, from gloomy, became furious. Send for the box-keeper, he shouted. Send for her, this minute, and bring her in to me here. And turn all those people out. The inspector tried to protest, but Richard closed his mouth with an angry order to hold his tongue. Then, when the wretched man's lips seemed shut forever, the manager commanded him to open them once more. Who is this opera ghost? He snarled. But the inspector was by this time incapable of speaking a word. He managed to convey, by a despairing gesture, that he knew nothing about it, or rather that he did not wish to know. "Have you ever seen him? Have you seen the opera ghost?" The inspector, by means of a vigorous shake of the head, denied ever having seen the ghost in question. "Very well," said Monsieur Richard coldly. The inspector's eyes started out of his head, as though to ask why the manager had uttered that ominous, "Very well." "Because I'm going to settle the account of anyone who has not seen him," explained the manager. "As he seems to be everywhere, I can't have people telling me that they see him nowhere. I like people to work for me when I employ them." Having said this, Monsieur Richard paid no attention to the inspector and discussed various matters of business with his acting manager, who had entered the room meanwhile. The inspector thought he could go and was gently, oh, so gently, sidling toward the door, when Monsieur Richard nailed the man to the floor with a thundering, "Stay where you are." Monsieur Remy had sent for the box-keeper to the Rue de Provence, close to the opera, where she was engaged as a porteress. She soon made her appearance. "What's your name?" "Madame Giry." "You know me well enough, sir. I'm the mother of little Giry, little Meg, what?" This was said in so rough and solemn a tone that, for a moment, Monsieur Richard was impressed. He looked at Madame Giry, in her faded shawl, her worn shoes, her old taffeta dress and dingy bonnet. It was quite evident from the manager's attitude, that he either did not know or could not remember having met Mme. Giry, nor even little Giry, nor even little Meg. But Madame Giry's pride was so great that the celebrated box-keeper imagined that everybody knew her. "Never heard of her," the manager declared. "But that's no reason, Madame Giry, why I shouldn't ask you what happened last night to make you and the inspector call in a municipal guard. I was just wanting to see you, sir, and talk to you about it, so that you mightn't have the same unpleasantness as Mr. de Bienne and Mr. Poligny. They wouldn't listen to me either, at first. I'm not asking you about all that. I'm asking what happened last night." Madame Giry turned purple with indignation. Never had she been spoken to like that. She rose as though to go, gathering up the folds of her skirt and waving the feathers of her dingy bonnet with dignity, but, changing her mind, she sat down again and said, in a haughty voice, "I'll tell you what happened." The ghost was annoyed again. Thereupon, as Mr. Richard was on the point of bursting out, Mr. Moncharmin interfered and conducted the interrogatory, whence it appeared that Madame Giry thought it quite natural that a voice should be heard to say that a box was taken, when there was nobody in the box. She was unable to explain this phenomenon, which was not new to her, except by the intervention of the ghost. Nobody could see the ghost in his box, but everybody could hear him. She had often heard him, and they could believe her, for she always spoke the truth. They could ask Mr. de Bienne and Mr. Poligny, and anybody who knew her, and also Mr. Isidore Sark, who had had a leg broken by the ghost. "Indeed," said Moncharmin, interrupting her. "Did the ghost break poor Isidore Sark's leg?" Ms. Giry opened her eyes with astonishment at such ignorance. However, she consented to enlighten those two poor innocents. The thing had happened in Mr. de Bienne and Mr. Poligny's time, also in Box 5 and also during a performance of Faust. Mme. Giry coughed, cleared her throat. It sounded as though she were preparing to sing the whole of Gounod's score, and began. "It was like this, sir. That night, Mr. Manière and his lady, the jewelers in the Rue Mogador, were sitting in the front of the box, with their great friend, Mr. Isidore Sark, sitting behind Mesdames Manière. Mephistopheles was singing. Ms. Giry here burst into song herself, Katerina, while you play at sleeping. And then Mr. Manière heard a voice in his right ear, his wife was on his left, saying, ha, ha. Julie's not playing at sleeping. His wife happened to be called Julie. So, Mr. Manière turns to the right to see who was talking to him like that. Nobody there. He rubs his ear and asks himself if he's dreaming. Then Mephistopheles went on with his serenade. But, perhaps I'm boring you gentlemen. No, no, go on. You are too good, gentlemen, with a smirk. Well, then, Mephistopheles went on with his serenade. Ms. Giry burst into song again. Saint, unclose thy portals holy and accord the bliss, to a mortal bending lowly, of a pardon kiss. And then Mr. Manière again hears the voice in his right ear, saying, this time, ha, ha. Julie wouldn't mind according a kiss to Isidore. Then he turns round again, but, this time, to the left. And what do you think he sees? Isidore, who had taken his lady's hand and was covering it with kisses through the little round place in the glove, like this, gentlemen, rapturously kissing the bit of palm left bare in the middle of her thread gloves. Then they had a lively time between them. Bang! Bang! Mr. Maniera, who was big and strong, like you, Mr. Richard, gave 2 blows to Mr. Isidore Sark, who was small and weak like Mr. Moncharmin, saving his presence. There was a great uproar. People in the house shouted, "That will do. Stop them. He'll kill him." Then, at last, Mr. Isidore Sark managed to run away. Then the ghost had not broken his leg? Asked Mr. Moncharmin, a little vexed that his figure had made so little impression on M's Geary. "He did break it for him, sir," replied Mme. Geary haughtily. "He broke it for him on the grand staircase, which he ran down too fast, sir, and it will be long before the poor gentleman will be able to go up it again." "Did the ghost tell you what he said in Mr. Maniera's right ear?" asked Mr. Moncharmin, with a gravity which he thought exceedingly humorous. "No, sir, it was Mr. Maniera himself." "So? But you have spoken to the ghost, my good lady?" "As I'm speaking to you now, my good sir," Ms. Geary replied. "And, when the ghost speaks to you, what does he say?" "Well, he tells me to bring him a footstool." This time, Richard burst out laughing, as did Moncharmin and Remy, the secretary. Only the inspector, warned by experience, was careful not to laugh, while Ms. Geary ventured to adopt an attitude that was positively threatening. Instead of laughing, she cried indignantly, "You'd do better to do as Mr. Poligny did, who found out for himself." "Found out about what?" asked Moncharmin, who had never been so much amused in his life. "About the ghost, of course. ... Look here." She suddenly calmed herself, feeling that this was a solemn moment in her life. "Look here," she repeated. They were playing Le Jouve. Mr. Poligny thought he would watch the performance from the ghost's box. Well, when Leopold cries, "Let us fly," you know, and Eleazar stops them and says, "Whither go ye?" Well, Mr. Poligny, I was watching him from the back of the next box, which was empty. Mr. Poligny got up and walked out quite stiffly, like a statue, and before I had time to ask him, "Whither go ye?" like Eleazar, he was down the staircase, but without breaking his leg. "Still, that doesn't let us know how the opera ghost came to ask you for a footstool," insisted Mr. Moncharmin. "Well, from that evening, no one tried to take the ghost's private box from him. The manager gave orders that he was to have it at each performance. And, whenever he came, he asked me for a footstool." "Tut, tut. A ghost asking for a footstool? Then this ghost of yours is a woman." "No, the ghost is a man." "How do you know?" "He has a man's voice. Oh, such a lovely man's voice." This is what happens. When he comes to the opera, it's usually in the middle of the first act. He gives 3 little taps on the door of box 5. The first time I heard those 3 taps, when I knew there was no one in the box, you can think how puzzled I was. I opened the door, listened, looked, nobody. And then I heard a voice say, Jules, my poor husband's name was Jules, a footstool, please. Saving your presence, gentlemen, it made me feel all overish like. But the voice went on, "Don't be frightened, mesdames. Jules, I'm the opera ghost." And the voice was so soft and kind that I hardly felt frightened. The voice was sitting in the corner chair, on the right, in the front row. "Was there anyone in the box on the right of box 5? asked Moncharmin. "No, box 7, and box 3, the one on the left, were both empty. The curtain had only just gone up." "And what did you do?" "Well, I brought the footstool. Of course, it wasn't for himself he wanted it, but for his lady. But I never heard her nor saw her." "Eh? What? So now the ghost is married?" The eyes of the 2 managers travelled from Mesdames Geary to the inspector, who, standing behind the box-keeper, was waving his arms to attract their attention. He tapped his forehead with a distressful forefinger, to convey his opinion that the widow Jules Geary was most certainly mad, a piece of pantomime which confirmed Mr. Richard in his determination to get rid of an inspector who kept a lunatic in his service. Meanwhile, the worthy lady went on about her ghost, now painting his generosity. "At the end of the performance, he always gives me 2 francs, sometimes 5, sometimes even 10, when he has been many days without coming. Only, since people have begun to annoy him again, he gives me nothing at all." "Excuse me, my good woman," said Moncharmin, while Ms. Geary tossed the feathers in her dingy hat at this persistent familiarity. "Excuse me, how does the ghost manage to give you your 2 francs? "Why, he leaves them on the little shelf in the box, of course. I find them with the program, which I always give him. Some evenings, I find flowers in the box, a rose that must have dropped from his lady's bodice, for he brings a lady with him sometimes. One day, they left a fan behind them." "Oh, the ghost left a fan, did he?" And what did you do with it? Well, I brought it back to the box next night. Here the inspector's voice was raised. You've broken the rules. I shall have to fine you, Musgiri. Hold your tongue, you fool, muttered Mr. Furman Richard. You brought back the fan. And then? Well, then, they took it away with them, sir. It was not there at the end of the performance, and in its place they left me a box of English sweets, which I'm very fond of. That's one of the ghost's pretty thoughts. That will do, Musgiri. You can go. When Musgiri had bowed herself out, with the dignity that never deserted her, the manager told the inspector that they had decided to dispense with that old madwoman's services, and, when he had gone in his turn, they instructed the acting manager to make up the inspector's accounts. Left alone, the managers told each other of the idea which they both had in mind, which was that they should look into that little matter of Box 5 themselves.